Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, folks. Michael Zuber, one rental at a time, back with the CEO of Hemlane, Miss Dana Dunford. How you doing, Dana?
I'm great. Thanks, Michael, for having me today.
Absolutely. So somebody that's been in the real estate a long time, as I have, we go back years. I wanted to take a left turn off our normal topics and talk about Zillow exiting the iBuyer program. Did that catch your radar, or maybe you missed it? And if you did, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so there's this huge thing about data and people going out there and talking about, wow, the one thing that's unique about Zillow is their data, and then there's inaccuracy with it.
Yeah, you think?
Right. There's that one caveat I would say, just as a founder and someone who's always trying to innovate and make things better, is it's hard. You really do feel for the folks there that were trying to change things, trying to say, is there a better model out there? Now, failure is just part of that process, right? That innovation process. And it is one of those things of like, could they have realized that earlier? Did they need to hire so many people and then lay off 25% of the workforce?
That hurts.
There's all of that, but you definitely do feel for the team and a lot of people from that perspective. So don't underestimate that. Like, innovation is really difficult. But then on the flip side, I related a lot to rentals and trends. So people always say, hey, you're a tech platform, and people sometimes use an agent, but sometimes they're doing the property management all themselves on Hemlane. Does that mean that they're gonna fail with this, right? And I actually have a really strong opinion on that. Okay. When you buy and sell properties, mass market, like north of 95%, you mentioned, use a broker. So they go out and use a broker to help them acquire a property or help them sell a property. And that hasn't changed over time. That you haven't seen that change from 1980 to now, even though I myself can go online and do all the research of the rental properties and figure out which one has the best cash flow. And this is the one I want to purchase based on what metrics I'm looking at. But that hasn't changed over time, even though most of that process I can do myself. And, part of that is it's a really large purchase. Part of it has to do with the dynamics of that whole process of putting in the offer. There's a lot that goes into it, but with rentals, it's completely different. When you're actually looking at property management, 72% of rentals are not using a full service traditional property manager. It's basically flipped, right?
Yeah.
And so from that perspective, I do think there is this, hey, should you be forcing a owner to use a property manager? Well, a lot of times when they're local, they want to manage it themselves. I don't recommend always managing it, especially if you're out of state. You should be using someone licensed to help you. But from that perspective, I do think rentals, you can't make the same parallel in rentals as you make in the buy-sell process. And you can just look at trends for that. So I'd love your kind of thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, it's funny that a lot of people kind of lean that way. And I think you're right. I think, first off, when you're buying a home, you got to remember there's really two things, right? There's this 95% number I threw out before we started recording. There's owner occupants who that's the one house they'll ever buy, right? And then there's investors who buy multiple, right? So there's that caveat. And then there's, when you think about investors, there's the kind of rule of thumb that nobody's going to do it like I can, right? Both save expenses. It was their home. They moved out. It actually shocks me it's not higher than 72%. If you were to ask me, I would have thought it would have been over 80 or 85% self-managed. It's very common. I think most of the investors in my course, thousands of people strong now, a lot of them self-manage. It's why I had to add content for self-management, because I don't do it, right?
Yeah.
I only can talk about what I know. So yeah, it's interesting. And self-management is, it's very common for landlords, but buying a home by yourself, most people wouldn't even fathom buying a house. You don't have access. You don't, the inspections. I mean, I couldn't imagine somebody signing up for a $300,000 house without because the broker's there to give you some assistance, to walk you through the process, to have their relationship, say, use this inspector. You really should get a roof. You really should do. It's that protection. So Yeah, I couldn't imagine doing
Yeah.
that without help.
Yeah, and you see it with the pricing of, when you look at Zillow and one of the reasons, and we won't have time to go through all the details, but one of the reasons that the model didn't work for them was this concept of price and really understanding the market.
Oh, their fatal error. And it's amazing that the market was so tight, Dana, that it bailed them out for a year. The model that they chose was broken from this.
Yeah.
The only reason they survived an extra year is because they found the one time in my 20-year history where inventory of available homes was 1 million across the country.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they were buying wrong. They just were flat out buying wrong. They were using Z estimates and algorithms that included future appreciation in their model. That's not how you run a flipping business.
Yep.
Just broken.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think when you're purchasing, knowing those prices and making sure you're not bidding way too much of, $100,000, $50,000, $10,000, $5,000 over what it should be. Really knowing the market, which I know you really emphasize, is there. In the rentals, it's different than the purchase process because you can tell based on how many tenant leads you get in the system if you're over or underpriced.
Yeah, exactly. It's very evident.
It's very evident, but the buying process is different. The buying process, when you think you go through it, it's like offers are due this day, right? Or submit an offer and we'll either decline or accept it, based on what market you're in. Every market works differently, right? But there's that process. Whereas in rentals, like you post it, you see how many tenants come in, and it's a much faster process where you, if you're self-managing your property, can actually change those prices. Like I've seen situations where someone has put the property too low, and one of the first people who comes in is like, great, I want the place. And I think it's hot. I can even tell how many contacts are, have inquired about this property. Can I give you $200 more in monthly rent? And can we close it there?
Yeah.
So it's a lot easier to go through that process. And on the buy sell side, you just really need someone there to help you. And I think that data is really important. So that's where, the two, you can't relate them, but there's a lot to learn from that. There's a lot to learn from data and stuff from what we saw with Zillow.
Yeah. Folks, do yourself a favor. Don't use appreciation in your models. That's not how you run a flipping business. I don't care how much data you have. Don't bet on appreciation. Yeah. So Dana, how can they follow Hemlane? And you giving away a 30-day trial. Where's that at?
Yeah, it's www.hemlane.com.
And folks, in my free course, you have a PDF with 30 days how to use it. And if you're in my paid course, she's done a video series on how to use that 30-day trial. So thank you very much, Dana.
Great. Thanks so much, Michael.